Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video we're going to have a think about a little musical device known as the nota cambiata. So it's quite useful to know about. Nota cambiata is Italian for changed note. Now it's interesting because in English we know this as a changing note, but just to make it clear that the Italian literally means change note. And it has a sort of context, it's a melodic pattern. If you have a look at this melody here, you'll see exactly what I mean. A melodic pattern where the line skips downwards a third, followed by a step in the opposite direction. So you see from this B flat to the G, we're skipping down a third, and then we're taking a step in the opposite direction. So that's how it actually works. And if you know about species counterpoint, the use of the nota cambiata in species counterpoint comes with much tighter restrictions, but I'm not intending to get bogged down with that at this point. It's just to introduce what is a nota cambiata. So if you see one, you'll know what it is. It quite often comes in Renaissance music, but it hangs around in music of later periods as well. So just in case you see one, well, you know what it is, or maybe you want to include some writing of the nota cambiata in your composition. But the reason for mentioning species counterpoint is that species counterpoint really relates to music of the Renaissance period, that period before the Baroque, when we're talking about sort of 1450 to 1600. That's where the cambiata comes from. So let's just unpack the full picture as to how a nota cambiata works. So I'm just going to present this in kind of 4 steps. And step 1 is this, that you start with a consonant note. So you see I've got this C here tied over from the bar before. It doesn't have to be tied over from the bar before, but quite often it is. But here's the step 1 note. That C that's still sounding here is consonant with this C in the lower part. So start with a consonant note. Step 2 is to move down by step. So you can see that this B flat is just a step down from the C. Now, the interesting thing is that a dissonance or a consonance? Well, actually, if you're analysing this in sort of Roman numerals, in a sort of with hindsight, really looking back on an earlier style, you'd say, well, this is simply the 7th of a dominant 7th chord. We look as if we're in F major and it's going 5, that makes it 5/7, and then it's resolving to 1. So it doesn't sound dissonant to our ears. However, back in its original state, that 7th would have been regarded as dissonant, but it's okay because it's happening in the context of a nota cambiata. So anyway, step 1, start with the consonants with this other part, then step 2, move down by step. Okay, step 3, we're going to skip down a third, and that must be in the same direction as step 2. So because we've moved down in step 2, we must move down again, but this time we're skipping down by a third. And then step 4 is to move up by step. And then that must move on to a harmony note. So it must belong to this chord. So you see we've effectively got a chord in the first half of this bar and a new chord in the second half of the bar. So that's consonant, that step there. This is consonant, this is consonant. This is the note that would originally in the Renaissance been seen as a dissonance, but post-Renaissance, actually, we don't particularly see that as a dissonance anymore. If you're thinking in more modern terms of this essentially being chord 5 followed by chord 1, and you're thinking, well, this B flat that was originally seen as a dissonance, but this B flat in a more modern understanding is just making this into a 5/7, you might be saying, well, hang on a moment, when you have a 5/7, surely that 7th has to resolve downwards by step. That's normally how we deal with it. When you have a 5/7, then the 7th falls by step and the 3rd normally rises by step. Well, here, in fact, this 7th does fall by step because the B flat resolves onto the A. And it's just that this G is a slight interruption in that resolution. But there is a resolution from B flat to A with the G, which could be a kind of decoration. That's quite interesting in itself, because later on when we use suspensions and we use 4/3 suspensions, sometimes we decorate those so they become 4/2/3 suspensions. Well, it's sort of what's happening here. If you look at those three notes in relation to the F, it's kind of going 4/2/3. So it's a kind of formula that's well tested, and in fact would have existed even back in the Renaissance period. So that's how a nota cambiata actually works. In Renaissance music, you'll often find that sort of formula coming at cadence points. So it will be a very familiar sound to those of you who perform Renaissance music or listen to Renaissance music. But it's just a little device worth knowing about. It causes a little bit of confusion if you're looking at Renaissance music thinking, well, I don't understand this because I don't understand why the seventh is dissonant, but it gets used like this. That's because in this particular case, it's being used in this context of a nota cambiata. So you see what we're doing? We've got a note that's consonant, we move down a step, then we skip down a third, and then we step back the other way. So what does this example of a nota cambiata actually sound like? Well, here it is. Just play that again. So, useful little device to know about. So, if you've never met it before, welcome to the nota cambiata.